Yasodanandana Prajajanaranjana Yamunatira Panachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yasodanandana Prajajanaranjana Yamunatira Panachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yasodanandana Prajajanaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Kishore Kishori ki jai, Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Maharani ki jai, Gornitai ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So this morning we're reading from Canto 10, Chapter 55, Texts 15 and 16. We're chanting responsibly text 15. Parisochati te matam Kariri Vagataraja Putra Sneha Kula Jina 79 Avivatsa Gauri Batura Parisochati te mata Kurari Vagataraja Putra Sneha Kula Dinam Vivatsa Gauri Batura Parisochati te mata Kurari Vagataraja Putra Sneha Kula Dinam Vivatsa Gauri Batura Parisochati te mata Kurari Vagataraja Putra Sneha Kuladina Vivatsa Gauri Batura. And the word for word. Sorry, my computer has changed something. Okay. Parisochati is crying. Te, your, mata, Mother Rukmini. Kurari, Iva, like an osprey. Gate, gone. Raja, whose son. Putra, for her child. Sneha, by love. Akula, overwhelmed. Dina, pitiful. Vivatsa, deprived of its calf. Gal, a cow. Eva, as. Atsura, extremely distressed. And the translation for text 15. And this is Mayavati talking. Your poor mother, having lost her son, cries for you like a kurari bird. She is overwhelmed with love for her child, just like a cow that has lost its calf. And then text 16. Prapasyaivam tadav vidyam prajumnaya mahatmana mane mayavati mahamayam sarva maya vinasmin. And the translation for text 16. Sukadeva Goswami continued. Speaking thus, Mayavati gave to the great soul Pradumya the mystic knowledge called Mahamaya, which vanquishes all other deluding spells. Om Jnanatimandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshuri Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manopistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Saramrupa Gadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Uta Padakam Shri Guru Vaishnavam Shah Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghutam Vitam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishaka Vitamscha. Hey Krishna Karina Sindhu Dina Bando Jagat Pate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gorangi Radha Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priya. Panchakalpatarubhyascha kripasindubhye vacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shrimati Ramapada Swami Iti Namine. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Prachayane Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschitya Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So neither of these texts has a purport, and so I'm going to use a bit of a narrative style just to put it into context. So, Mayavati is speaking to Pradumya, with Sukadev Goswami narrating this exchange, when Mayavati, or Rati as was her name in her previous lifetime, comes to inform Pradumya of the full truth of his identity, after she had spontaneously exhibited some conjugal feelings towards him. And Srila Prabhupada writes, so this is Krishna book, Krishna the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Mayavati could understand that her former husband, so husband from her previous life, Cupid, as he was known, was born as Pradumya and had grown into such a nice young man. And she also gradually became captivated and lusty. Smiling before him with a feminine attractiveness, she expressed her desire for sexual union. He therefore inquired from her, "How is it possible that first you were affectionate like a mother, and now you are expressing the symptoms of a lusty woman? What is the reason for such a change?" On hearing this statement from Pradumya, the woman, Rati, replied, "My dear sir," this is Srila Prabhupada writing, "My dear sir, you are the son of Lord Krishna. Before you were 10 days old, you were stolen by the Sambara demon and later thrown into the water and swallowed by a fish. In this way, you have come under my care, but actually, in your former life as Cupid, I was your wife. Therefore, my manifestation of conjugal symptoms is not at all incompatible." So that's Srila Prabhupada writing on, just filling in the context and taking from his writings in the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna book. So continuing, "Sambara wanted to kill you, and he's endowed with various mystic powers. Therefore, before he again attempts to kill you, please kill him as soon as possible with your divine power. Since you were stolen by Sambara, your mother Rukmini, Devi, has been in a very grievous condition. Like a kukari bird who has lost her babies, she's very affectionate towards you, and since you have been taken away from her, she has been living like a cow, aggrieved over the loss of its calf." So that brings us the context and the particular verse for today. So just exploring it a little bit more deeply, the context. Mayavati or Rati, that was her identity as Cupid's wife, Cupid being Pradumya's former identity, is actually his own eternal Shakti, the mother of Aniruddha. And so that's actually the identity of Mayavati or Rati. She's the eternal Shakti and the mother of Aniruddha according to the Vaishnava Tushani. So that's Vaishnava Tushani. It's Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur quoting from Srila Jiva Goswami. So Srila Jiva Goswami brings this as evidence for the identity of Mayavati, and Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur repeats it. So the statement Rati has made was the following. So this is touching on this point of what her identity is. So context is a conversation with Pradyumna. You are the son of Lord Narayan, and you were kidnapped from your parents' home by Sambara. I, Rati, am your legitimate wife, O Master, because you are Cupid. So she states it directly. So just taking into account, it's very interesting, the fact that Mayavati or Rati, she is expressing this to Pradyumna when he's reached maturity. It also draws attention to the fact that actually she's not his actual mother, which is what it would appear that he was expressing to her, asking her what is the reason for her shift in her mood and attitude towards him. Because in fact it was Rukmini Devi who was the actual mother of Pradyumna. And because Mayavati is honing in and putting emphasis on the factual thing, now that he's a grown man, that actually she was his wife in a former lifetime. And there's a similar mention as Mayavati or Rati being Pradyumna's eternal Shakti, in Lord Krishna being described as Sadashanpatin, or an ideal husband for Rukmini, being just like her. So I'm drawing attention to father and son, and something of the nature of the connection between Krishna and Rukmini, and this connection between Mayavati or Rati and Pradyumna. Cupid. So Rukmini is described as Sadasham Bharyam, an ideal wife for Lord Krishna, because she's just like him. And so the understanding that this was so that connection between Lord Krishna and Rukmini was based on a strong similarity. It's natural, because Rukmini is Krishna's internal potency. So there's that similarity, Rukmini being Krishna's internal potency, and Mayavati or Rati being the internal Shakti of Pradyumna. So there's an automatic understanding between the two entities. So this description had been as follows. This is coming from earlier on in the 52nd chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam in the 10th canto. Lord Krishna knew that Rukmini possessed intelligence, auspicious bodily markings, beauty, proper behavior, and all other good qualities. Concluding that she would be an ideal wife for him, he made up his mind to marry her So that was the description that was given. Krishna's recognizing, or at least verbalizing, those qualities and the beauty that would allow her to be the perfect wife for him to marry. So the internal potency of Krishna is that which covers Krishna. So generally, it covers him or keeps him concealed from persons that aren't very intelligent, or even non-devotees, one could say. So the degree of internal strength is such that few people could understand Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So he's considered generally by the common man to be just like themselves. Like a person who's not familiar with Krishna, I come across it because persons come new to the temple, and I get to hear the concepts they have, and generally they consider Krishna quite ordinary, like no different from themselves. Unusual, but this is how it is. And this Krishna understands. And he puts it this way, he explains it: I am never manifest to the foolish and unintelligent, for then I'm covered by my internal potency, and therefore they do not know that I'm unborn and infallible. So in the case of Rukmini, as his internal potency, she in fact is very powerful and very influential. And one could say the same of the nature of Rati in relation to Pradumya, or Mayavati in relation to Pradumya, being that internal Shakti. Actually, she's a very powerful personality and very influential. And in fact, one of the verses touches on the fact that she actually gave knowledge to Pradumya of some ways of counteracting the mysticism of Sambara, which will be coming up. So at the time of her brother Rukmini forbidding his family members to give Rukmini to Krishna, whom he envied, Rukmini, she analyzed the situation, and she had sent a trustworthy Brahmana to Krishna, and the Brahmana told Krishna everything on Krishna's request. In fact, so trustworthy was the Brahmana that Krishna asked him to read the contents of the letter. And this is how one gets a glimpse into Rukmini's actual position by her writing and her understanding of Krishna. She puts it this way: O beauty of the world. So this is addressing Krishna in a letter whom she's not met. O beauty of the world, having heard of your qualities which enter the ears of those who hear and remove their bodily distress, and having heard of your beauty which fulfills all the visual desires of those who see, I have fixed my shameless mind upon you, O Krishna. So that was the content of the letter, or part of it, at least, how to draw attention to this fact of her deep understanding of Krishna and their deep connection, and also his understanding of her. And the point is, they had not met. So that deep internal connection. So the idea that Rukmini is like Krishna, so therefore having the qualification to be his wife, has her echoing something of Krishna, giving insight into himself. She draws attention to Krishna's qualities, and one can infer from Krishna's statement, the one that I'd read in Bhagavad Gita 7:25, which was, I'm never manifest to the foolish and unintelligent. For them I'm covered by my internal potency, and therefore they do not know that I'm unborn and infallible. So just the fact that she's drawing attention to Krishna's qualities, one can infer from this statement that Krishna has made that he is filled with eternal knowledge and bliss. He's endowed with infinitely auspicious qualities and activities, and that he's visible to devotees. And this inference can be made, and Srila Baladev Vijayapu's son makes that inference. And to paraphrase, it would be as though Krishna is saying, I am the person who has no birth. This is because I'm also without change, avyayam. My form, powers, omniscience, and other qualities are unchanging in their nature. And just to read that particular text, because I'm highlighting this particular point about Krishna. Naham paraksha sarvasya yogamaya samavrita mudhoyam nabujanati lokomam ajam avyayam. So he's completely omniscient. So the common characteristics of devotees who've actually developed ecstatic love for Krishna. The persons who had such deep insight into his qualities, who understand this point that he doesn't have any birth and that he's eternally existent, and that he's has perfect knowledge of everything. And one of those characteristics of a person who's actually developed ecstatic love for Krishna and, therefore has got this deep insight that one is getting just by hearing Rukmini speaking, because of course I'm highlighting this thing of the deep internal understanding in relationship with Krishna. So one of those characteristics is pridelessness. And this is given in Nectar of Devotion, Srila Prabhupada's summary study, and which is defined as being in a position of possessing all the qualities of pure realization, but not being proud of that position. So even when you hear Rukmini speaking, clearly you can deduce that she herself must be possessing extraordinary qualities just by virtue of her insight into Krishna, understanding him as being the beauty of the world, or as the personality that satisfies all one's visual desires. So great is his beauty. It draws attention to this particular characteristic of being so prideless. And that pridelessness is just one of the characteristics that goes along with this this position of deep realization of Krishna's qualities. And Mayavati, or Rati, she describes to Pradyumna the state of Rukmini, because that's what we're touching on today. The mother who has lost her child. So we don't know the interim part, because the part we heard was Krishna and Rukmini's marriage and the extraordinary arrangements that were made, and the entire city of Dwarka engaging in the festivities. And now we're hearing just this fact that her child has been stolen. So, and this is what Mayavati or Rati describes about Rukmini. She's like a mother who has lost her who has had her child, she's a mother who's had her child kidnapped, and Mayavati Rati describes her this way. She's overwhelmed with love for her child, just like a cow who has lost its calf. So, unfortunately, we live in such a terrible time and a society that engages in the most horrific practices. But if you actually even look in like farmers' journals, one of the common problems that we don't hear about this, but one of the common problems that farmers have to deal with because of the cruel practices of removing calves from the mother for killing, but the calf is removed from the mother. And one of the problems that all these farmers who engage in rearing cows for that purpose have to deal with is that when the calf is removed from the mother, the poor mother cow won't rest. So it won't lie down, close its eyes. It just sort of wanders around very aimlessly, wanders and wanders around, and at the same time moves very pitifully. And this apparently goes on for more than 15 days. So in farmers' journals, there's farmers sometimes who get newly exposed to this, who then write and say, please advise me, what must I do? What do I do about these full milk bags that are there on the cow? Because the calf is now gone. And when does it stop? There's a pitiful mooing. So that's how Rukmini is described. It's almost like a cow that, there's a sort of aimlessness and there's pitiful sound coming because the baby is gone. So, so she's in a state of mourning. So that's actually the situation with Rukmini. So there's a description of Rukmini's child, so we get that. This is the description. He took birth in the womb of Vaidarbi from the seed of Lord Krishna and received the name Pradumya. In no respect was he inferior to his father. So we're getting that this was from right in the beginning of this particular canto that we're on and this chapter that we're on. Right away we're getting that connection with Krishna, and so drawing attention to the fact that he's not inferior in any way to Lord Krishna. So this child, Pradumya, had Cupid or Kamanadev, a servant of Indra, enter within him by the will of Krishna. So Krishna made a rather extraordinary arrangement. There was a disembodied Cupid, and Krishna made the arrangement that entity could enter into the body of Pradumya. So for this reason, Kamadev became famous as Pradumya. So Krishna's arrangement. So Pradumya actually had a Satchit Ananda body, a completely spiritual body, as opposed to Kamadev, who's an entity with special powers, but still he's conditioned, means still he's under the control of material nature. But that was not the case with Pradumya. Pradumya was completely on a transcendental plane. He had a completely spiritualized body. And the confirmation for this statement that I've just made is given by Srila Vishwanath. Again, he's quoting from Gopalat Tashani Upanishad. And this is the quote. In Dwarka, the Almighty Sri Krishna, endowed with his full potency, resided in the company of his three plenary expansions, Balaram, Aniruddha, and Pradyumna. So this gives insight, based on this quote, that Pradyumna is actually part of that trio of personalities or expansions of Krishna that are residing with him in Dwarka. So in this way, Pradyumna, who's the third member of Lord Krishna's eternal fourfold expansion, the Chaturvyuha, appeared according to the reputation of the mundane Cupid, Kamadev, who's contained within Pradyumna. So, Srila Vishwanath explains that when the eternal associates of Krishna, Svan Bhagavan, appear in this world by the Lord's desire, they assume the reputation of the opulent potencies, the vibhutis Krishna contains within himself. So that's why they've mentioned that Pradyumna can be seen as no different from Krishna. He's carrying all kinds of opulences that are coming from Krishna, that Krishna contains within himself. So that's actually the reputation of Pradyumna, the fact, and it's emphasized that he's not different from Krishna. So in fact, such a personality, somebody who's actually one of the associates of Krishna, one can say, is appearing in that kind of way, rather than appearing according to his own reputation. That connection with Krishna is the prominent feature. So, in this case, Pradyumna had Kamanadev residing within him, and obviously Kamanadev had a certain reputation. But he's not appearing according to that reputation of Kamanadev, but rather he's carrying all the opulences of Krishna, and so it's actually that Kamanadev is going to become famous as Pradyumna, because Pradyumna is carrying all the opulences of Krishna. So that's the prominent reputation. So, in a situation in this world, the role of the parent, because here, I touched on it a little bit earlier, that it would appear that there was some confusion about Mayavati's role. So the role of a parent in this world is generally to establish a healthy atmosphere where there's acceptance of the child. That's generally the role of the parent. So naturally, not every behavior is accepted, but if some behaviors are rejected by the parent that they see the child exhibiting, that rejection isn't a rejection of the child or the person per se. There's always that acceptance atmosphere that's created for the child. So the tone of voice and the manner would indicate that a person is valued. So this is the role of a parent. There has to be even such subtle things as the tone of voice and the manner that's used with the child. It has to indicate to the child that the child is valued. It's a duty of a parent. And even if a particular act may not be valued. So it's always the duty of the parent to maintain that atmosphere of acceptance of the child. So the deed that a child performs is always separated from the child. So it means that any consequence that's applied to the child by the parent is applied in the spirit of friendliness. There has to be that. So the ability to accept the child is influenced by certain variables, naturally. How the parent feels about his or herself, and also the circumstances in the life of the parent. So the specific situation in which a behavior occurs influences acceptance. So, for example, there may be behavior that is tolerated in a family setting, but it may not be tolerated if it's in the company of others. There's an unusual circumstance that we're looking at in this particular section of the Bhagavatam, and that is that Mayavati got told by Narada Muni, so here she is, she's actually this baby that is found in the belly of the fish that comes to the kitchen where she's working, is given to her. So she's supposed to play a maternal role, because naturally it's kind of like being a foster parent. There's a kind of maternal role that needs to be played. And the interesting thing in her, that happens with her, and this is part of that thing of what the situation is of the parent and how they see themselves, and this has something to do with the acceptance of the child or the atmosphere that gets created. Mayavati, she actually had Narada Muni arrive and say to her, and this is very unusual because she's told by Narada Muni, these were his words, Mayavati, this child is Cupid, your husband. What an unusual circumstance for someone to have to actually play the role of a kind of parental role, taking into account that she's given the knowledge that actually the same entity is her husband, who's now going to be growing up in her care to maturity, to a mature body. Very unusual circumstance. So naturally, taking into account that, the whole role in a parent, the whole requirement in a parental role is that mood of acceptance of the entity, the child. In Mayavati's case, she's approaching the situation with Hare Krishna. She's approaching the situation with an understanding that this child's actually her husband from a former lifetime. So a little bit unusual. So in her case, she had in fact been waiting for her husband to obtain a new body. Fully conscious, fully aware, because his body had been incinerated by Rudra. And having this understanding that this child, this particular body, in the small child form, was actually that husband she'd been waiting for. She began to feel love for him as a wife might for a husband. So the description is that displaying the opulences of Lord Krishna, Pradumya had great beauty. So it's carrying vibhutis, so special opulences. And just as Rukmini described Krishna as the beauty of all the worlds, here it is, one hears that Pradumya had great beauty. And this is the description. His eyes were broad like the petals of a lotus. His arms were very long. So is considered attractive, and in a different age, the bodies were much taller. So it would make sense that the arms were extremely long. Rati came to express her conjugal attraction to Pradyumna spontaneously. So she's viewing the beautiful form, and there's even mentioned that most ladies upon seeing Pradyumna were entranced with his beauty. And so Rati, Mayavati, she spontaneously comes to express her conjugal attraction. So seeing Pradyumna as her husband. And so she actually comes under the sway of lust before actually revealing to Pradyumna in private the truth of his identity. I think her eyebrows are raised, and there's a kind of feminine charm she exhibits. So in this section today, there's a part of the explanation given of his identity. So just the mention of, where his origin was and who the actual mother was, and hence I've touched on this whole complexity of the situation. And in addition, Mayavati or Rati, knowing full well who Pradyumna was right from the beginning, and knowing full well that Sambara had tried to kill him, and now is the moment where his actual identity is emerging, and she's informing him of that. And from Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, actually Pradyumna also understands. So although he asks the question, what is the reason for the change in the mood and the attitude, Srila Vishwanath explains that Pradyumna in fact was saying he understands the particular mood she has. So Mayavati, in this moment in time where the identity is revealed of Pradyumna, she actually also gives him some mystic knowledge of how to vanquish deluding spells, because he's going to be confronting Sambara. So, just to end, it's very interesting because here's this, you could say from a material perspective, it's a highly complex situation from the point of view of the circumstance in which Mayavati was, but her insight into the situation, the role she had to play, the moment when the necessity to make clear the identity of the child that had grown up under her, and actually shift the reality into a different frame, is all part of, in one sense, something that persons in this world that we find ourselves also have to confront, of how we view ourselves. And naturally that's influenced greatly by one's own upbringing. And but as adults, we come to the point where we actually have to seriously look at what is our identity. And so somehow, by good fortune, one comes to understand one's actual identity on the transcendental plane, even while being in a material body. So the difficulty that one faces is shifting that ego, that identity one holds of oneself. It's called the false ego. So interestingly enough, it's actually to the Chaturvyuha that one can actually pray to allow one to move away from the false identification one has of who one actually is, or who one thinks one is. So there's a very nice prayer. It's given in the 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, a prayer to the Chaturvyuha. So this is the prayer. So it's specifically praying that one's pride doesn't get the better of one. So obeisances to you, O Supreme Lord Vasudeva, and to your forms as Sankarshan, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha, O Supreme Personality of Godhead, all obeisances unto you. O Lord Narayan, the Creator of the universe, best of personalities, Master of this creation, and original form of the universe, O Super Soul of all created beings, all homage unto you. So just praising in that kind of way. It's a prayer that's supposed to help to subdue one's own false identity. So those are some thoughts on these two verses, and trying to put them into context if there's any addition.
Hare Krishna, Mata. Thank you so much for this vivid description. There are two thoughts that came to my mind during the class. One was Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur revealing that Pradyumna knew already what Rati was revealing, or kind of understood. And in other scriptures in Bhagavatam, we do not see that, but time and again Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is somehow able to see behind the picture what's going on. Another thing I was thinking that, Pradyumna grew up fast, but he still grew up from a baby. And I just thought it was quite interesting that he was cared for, fostered by one of the maidservants of Sambara, Mayavati, and somehow Sambara didn't know that Pradyumna was growing up in his own palace.
Yes. Well, that's part of that. It's interesting, you drawing attention to the fact that Sambara demon remained oblivious to the fact that the very person that he had tried to kill as a baby, that same person had arrived into his very palace and was now growing up, being taken care of by Mayavati, who was working as the cook, dealing with the rice and vegetables that were being prepared for Sambara. And I think it draws attention again to this very fundamental statement made by Krishna that he is not visible to persons who are unintelligent. His internal potency covers him from the view of unintelligent or demoniac persons such as Sambara was. So, taking into account that Pradyumna is got all the qualities of Krishna, and his internal Shakti or potency is right there, Mayavati, it's very understandable that there's the shield, that there is no way Sambara demon could have understood. It was hidden from him completely. And that's in line with Lord Krishna's statement that the unintelligent they cannot actually even recognize. And the other interesting thing is that internal Shakti of Pradyumna Mayavati she in fact had come to Sambara's palace. He had taken her thinking that this was going to be his object of enjoyment. But so strong was that internal potency and the covering potency that actually he put her in the kitchen as his cook, but his original intention had been to have her as a companion. So there's again that indication of what Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita 7:25, I am never manifest to the foolish and unintelligent. For them I am covered by my internal potency, and therefore they do not know that I'm unborn and infallible. So there was, not only was Pradumya and his identity and his presence in Sambara's home made invisible to Sambara, but so too was Mayavati's role. Even though she'd accompanied Sambara, he was so covered that by the time she got there, she was just relegated to being a cook. So she remained untouched by Sambara, although his intention had been otherwise. So that's the thing, the internal potency that just keeps persons protected completely from having insight into the actual identity of these associates of Lord Krishna. So thank you for bringing up your comment. It's tied it up very nicely. Okay. Thank you very much for your very kind attention. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.